Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Margo Alves. I'm going to be introducing our amazing, wonderful, fantastic speakers today, Anupam and Eli. I'm going to start with their bios real quick, and then I'm going to give the floor to them. So Eli, as the program manager for design, project, and student engagement and career development at the University of Arizona, Eli Burke, pronouns he, him, works to connect our local Tucson community with our students on campus, teaches courses on human-centered design across all disciplines, and runs the annual design thinking challenges on campus. As the former education director at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, Arizona, Eli provided leadership, direction, and coordination for the museum's education and public programs. He is currently a PhD student in art and visual culture education at the University of Arizona with a minor in social, cultural, and critical theory. Eli is also an artist and received his MFA in studio art from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where he was a full tuition merit scholarship recipient. As an interdisciplinary artist, he uses a diverse range of mediums, including drawing, painting, printmaking, and installation, focusing on magic, mystery, vulnerability, empathy, transness, queerness, the body, abstraction, and agency. In addition to MoCA, he taught as adjunct at Pima Community College and the University of Arizona. His research and programming focus on his queer imaginary intergenerational learning, access, empathy, and vulnerability. And then our other amazing speaker, Anupam Singh, is an artist and educator and current fellow at the University of Arizona who employs the idea of distributed authorship in both teaching and practice. His passion for art lies in harnessing its power to facilitate dialogue, build community, and tell stories. And he finds it most effective when it evolves through collective processes. His artistic research is grounded in mutualism and critically exploring identity politics in the post-colonial world. Through process-based collaborative projects, he strives to investigate and understand power relations, politics, and ethics of contemporary art practice and their relation to globalization and capitalism. All right, y'all, take it away.
Well, thank you, Margo. Thank you so much. So today we are going to talk about design thinking, practice, and history of it. And before we start that, we want to say whatever we're going to share today is just the starting point of an interrogation and criticism of design thinking, its root and who it is for. Our long-term goal is to trace the genealogy of thoughts and practices that led to this methodology for problem solving. Before we move forward, I think we're going to just briefly talk about what design thinking, and maybe Eli, you can elaborate on that.
Yes, so essentially this is a sort of an intro to a project that we are starting to work on. So it's not, we're just at the beginning. And so we want to sort of unpack what design thinking is for everyone. And then also, Anupam will share a project that he worked on that where he was sort of unknowingly using this process, which I think many of us do. And so I think the focus is to intentionally use this process, knowingly use this process, but also interrogate the process and its history, because it's really grounded in a lot of elements that people have been doing for thousands of years. And so we really want to trace that. So what is design thinking? In my work, design thinking is really used as a tool to affect change, social change. However, it's applied in many different ways. It mostly, I think, has like a consumer applications in terms of products, physical products, but that has expanded into, we can apply it to community-based programs or community work, and think about how we can design even curriculum or events or really anything, experiences. So it's a great process. However, there's space to improve it. So what is design thinking? It is also called human-centered design. So it focuses on individual perspectives. It's interdisciplinary. The power of design thinking is in the multitude of voices that are involved in the process of problem solving. You can think about it as a creative problem-solving methodology. So it's important that there's lots of voices in the room from lots of different backgrounds and disciplines. As I said, used to create products, services, and experiences, used to solve problems or challenges. It's used to discover new opportunities. Design thinking encourages us to slow down. I think when people have problems, you know, if we think about folks in our lives, or if we have a problem, when we talk about that problem, the first thing we want to do is say, well, what if you tried this? Or we're problem solving creatures, so it's like a natural response. But this process forces us to slow down and be a little bit more thoughtful about how we approach problem solving. It encourages us to look at a problem from all angles before jumping to possible solutions. And it can often lead to innovative and creative solutions just due to the number of, voices and perspectives. I always think about it as kind of creating that third space of between two people, this new idea is formed that we couldn't have come to on our own. And it creates space for designers to generate wild ideas. So a little diagram. This is from the D School at Stanford. These are the steps or the phases that you would go through, the stages of design thinking. They're displayed here in a linear way. However, it doesn't have to be a linear process. In fact, it often jumps around from thing to thing. And I'm going to go through each step as quickly as possible for the sake of time. But just wanted you to see this as a common, if you Google design thinking image search, you would see many of these types of diagrams. And this sort of just illustrates how design thinking is not always a linear process. Sometimes you have to return to previous steps and revisit to, because we find as we uncover potential solutions, we also sometimes create new problems. So we sometimes have to go back. So empathy is the first step. It's the foundation of human-centered design. Some people call it the heart, or some people refer to it as sort of the gas that keeps it going. And if you don't spend enough time on this step, you could run out of gas before the end, right? You could run out of data that you need to finish the process. So foundation of human-centered design, it allows us to learn about the values of particular users or partners, I like to call them. People often first connect with empathy with emotion. However, empathy in this scenario, empathy is any scenario where we attempt to block our own bias and attempt to view the world as if we inhabited the body of another. That's how I like to think about it, like placing myself in someone else's body and experiencing the world from their perspective. To empathize, you must observe users and their behaviors. You need to engage with and interview users. And this outlines intercepts in interviews, but there's lots of ways to do this. But the goal is to immerse yourself in the user's experience by placing yourself in their position. The next step is to define. So this is where, often when we work with a partner, they'll say we have this challenge, which to me is often the symptom of the problem. So through empathizing and collecting data, then we can work to define what the real problem is, what's causing that symptom. So there's lots of tools to do this. One of them is called the 5 whys, where you just sort of ask, like I would ask someone, what time do you get up in the morning? And they might say 7 o'clock. And then you ask why, and they answer that question. And then you ask them why a total of 5 times. And it kind of really gets down into deeper elements of whatever your question was. You can develop personas of your audience or all the stakeholders. You often will have to redefine. So like I said, it's not a linear process. You're going to get through it and have to kind of go back, redefine your sort of problem. And then you develop multiple problem statements, which we frame as how might we create a better space for community to connect or something like that. The next step is to ideate. So this is where, at the beginning steps, you sort of try to set yourself aside, try to set your own history and where you come from aside as much as you can, because you're placing yourself in the position of your partner's experience. But in this phase, actually, it's really important to bring that back in. And the individuals who are doing the ideation really, the goal is to bring your experience and perspective into the process. It's a quantity, not quality. So this is like quickly brainstorming ideas, as many as possible. You're suspending judgment towards yourself and others that you're working with. Like, as I said, the interdisciplinary approach allows for a diversity of ideas to sort of emerge, novelty over relevance. So we're not, while we want it to be within the scope of the challenge or the problem, we also want new novel ideas. So going outside that a little bit is okay. Everyone involved should have a voice at the table. And some of the tools are things like mind maps, storyboards, sketches, skits. There's lots of things you can use to ideate. It's actually a really fun part of the process. And then prototyping. This is a quick example, a physical example of your idea. So even if it's an event or a program, you can create a miniature space. It's meant to be created quickly, and it's meant to illustrate to who you're problem solving for what your idea is. And it's supposed to be quick and inexpensive. So like little paper sculptures, or, very basic models. And then you test. So you invite your partner to come and check out what you've come up with and get feedback. And this is often where you're going to jump back and revise and refine your ideas. So you want to continue learning from your partners. And it's important to remember that, sometimes things are never finished, right? When we think about technology, which is something that design thinking is applied to very frequently. In fact, Apple was one of the first companies to adopt design thinking. Technology is always evolving. So it's a process that's never finished. They're always going to be looking at how are people using this technology and how will it evolve over time. Reflection and learning are important. Failure is a huge important element of this because we learn from that. So one of the phrases that we use in design thinking is bias towards action, which means we act and then learn from what we've done. We don't spend a lot of time sitting around talking and processing, and we want to come up with an idea, create a prototype, test it, revise, and keep doing that until we've come up with something that is what we were looking for. And this may become an infinite loop, like I said, with technology. So we're going to give you two examples of design thinking. One is had a positive outcome, although there are still problems with this. So, and I think Anupam is going to touch upon that a little bit after this video. And then the second one is one that really was not successful. And I think you'll understand why. So I'm just going to play this video and we'll be back in 1 sec. What's that? Can you hear it okay? Anupam, can you hear the video?
I can, but the sound is choppy. Maybe it's my network. But
no, you know what? If you don't mind, I'm gonna stop sharing real quick and then reshare because I forgot to click the button. Sorry, everyone.
Perfect. Good. Better than not being able to hear it.
Okay, now let me know if this sounds better.
Newborn babies in India, one that would cost less than $200 and help to solve the crisis of infant mortality in the developing world.
More babies die here in India than in any other country in the world. In fact, nearly 2 million children under the age of 5 die in this country every year. Most of them live in poor neighborhoods like this one outside the city of Hyderabad. Most of the babies who die here don't even make it 1 month.
One of the biggest problems they face is simply staying warm. Because these babies are so tiny, they don't have enough fat to regulate their own body temperature. 4 million of these babies die every year. The ones who do not die grow up with severe long-term health problems because so much of their bodily functions are going towards staying warm that their organs don't develop normally.
Jane and her team traveled to India to see for themselves why the babies were dying. They learned that 80% of the tiny infants who need incubators only need them to keep warm. And most of them were in remote villages and in the urban slums, far from hospitals with the $20,000 machines.
By the end of the class, we knew we were onto something good. This is the most amazing team. A PhD in electrical engineering, an aerospace engineer, a master's in computer science who have left behind what could have been far more lucrative careers to be saving babies.
We knew we had something that was immensely important not only to us as a team but also to the world.
The Stanford students now live in India. They have taken years fine-tuning the design of their cheap portable incubator. Dozens of models tried and rejected until this. It looks like a sleeping bag for newborns. It can be washed in boiling water. The inside is seamless so bacteria can't collect.
Hello there. This is a 2-day-old baby. Oh my goodness.
And the baby inside is kept warm by a plastic sheet containing paraffin wax.
And it's wax and water. It actually probably feels a little bit like the womb, right?
It does. In fact, all the babies we've put into this have fallen asleep immediately.
The wax is melted using an electric warmer where there's electricity, or simply by pouring boiling water on it. The wax is tucked in the back and will remain at 98 degrees for 4 hours and then can be reheated. All this for less than $200.
Hi, Munchkin. Hi there. He's sound asleep.
The culmination of 2 years of work, of hard work, of constant prototypes, and finally we have a product that is actually helping, a newborn child, and it's unbelievable.
After 2 years on the drawing board, Jane and her team were finally ready to try their portable baby warmer on someone who needed it. Nisha, a 5-pound baby girl who was struggling to keep herself warm in a village in Bangalore.
The first time I saw a baby put in this, I just had chills down my spine.
Baby Nisha survived. She just turned 5 months old. Doctors at the Cradle Hospital in Bangalore have just finished the first round of tests on the Embrace baby warmer. A second and final set of trials are about to begin.
We're going to meet the highest quality standards. We're not bringing a second-rate product to developing countries.
What's been the reaction within the medical community to this device?
It's been incredible. And doctors are literally lining up to place orders for the product.
Clinics without incubators will use the baby warmers to move critically ill babies to city hospitals. Mothers in rural villages will use them to keep their underweight newborns warm and alive.
So how many babies' lives do you think you can save with this?
Over the next 5 years, we hope to save and help over 1 million babies.
And most of them will be from villages like this one, where Jane and the Embrace team have refined their baby warmer with the help of the mothers who will eventually use it.
Because in these villages, it's an everyday fact, right? That babies die. In fact, in many villages, you don't even name your baby for the first month of life.
Sudatha has lost all 3 of her newborn children. All were low birth weight babies. All died because they were too small to keep themselves warm.
The vision for me is that babies no longer die from being cold, that every rural clinic and every rural healthcare worker is equipped with the Embrace device.
Sudatha was shown the newest Embrace baby warmer, and soon other women from the village joined in. They too had lost children, they said. And within minutes, they were teaching each other how the baby warmer is used. If I had this, Sudatha said, I could have saved my babies. I could have had children. In March, the mass production of Embrace baby warmers will begin. India will be served first, and then the world.
There is a huge, huge global need for this. From Uganda, from Haiti, from Poland, asking when can we purchase these? And hearing that just made me realize how close we are to fulfilling our mission, right? To giving mothers a chance to save their children. And that's what drives me.
So you're going to change the world starting right here in India.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly jump in because I think this is an amazing product which can save like millions of lives. But when I was looking at this film, I was thinking about like how, and if there are certain cultural biases still stuck to the production designing, because one, it was not addressing the core of the problem, which is malnourishment. And in a society where, it comes under poverty level, and the daily wages come from like as low as $1.05 a day, and that means $45 a month. And for that kind of community, how can that $200 make sense? And that's what I was thinking when we were talking about human-centered design, and then shading off all the biases that we have, how inherently sometimes it can be layered with the cultural biases that we are like practicing within, and looking, and also looking as a consumer product, not beyond that. So I that came in my mind when I was watching that film. Yeah, thank you, Eli, for showing that film.
Yeah. And that's a huge part of why we want to work on this. When I began, sorry, trying to get to the next slide. Here we go. When I began working with this process, the first thing I felt was that there was a lot of inequity, and particularly in terms of its own history, and really trying to understand the roots of this process. And I think, you know, if we're going to use human-centered design focused on humans' experiences or individual experiences, we really need to interrogate the history and look at where did it come from. And I think that might, you know, have some clues as to how it could be better applied in service to everyone. So that was an example of one of the things you may have noticed in that video is when she talked about where each person that was working on that team came from, like their background, and it was a very interdisciplinary team of people. And that's really the power, I believe, in this process. This example that I'm going to play, it's only like less than 2 minutes long, but this is a project that did not quite work out as successfully as the Embrace Baby Warmer, and for all the reasons that Anupam just mentioned. So here we go.
This work, The Problem with the Play Pump, derives from my PhD research. This is actually a photograph I took in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. The play pump makes a really good object for understanding relationships between first world supporters of development projects and developing world users. It's a children's roundabout that pumps water to an elevated water tank, and there are billboards rented out on the water tank, and the income from that advertising is meant to fund the maintenance of the pump. It was a very popular project as it was portrayed in the media in Europe and America, and lots of people wanted to support and fund it. So it sounded great. Unfortunately, it doesn't really work very well on the ground. Children's play is not sufficient to pump enough water for their community, so adults end up turning the roundabout by hand, and that's actually a lot more difficult and less efficient than an ordinary hand pump. Not only that, but because the water tank is usually empty, they have to pump water to the height of the water tank, which is 6 meters up, before they can access it. And that would maybe be mitigated by the income from advertising on the billboards, except that very few advertisers were interested in advertising to poor rural audiences. So all of the features of the play pump that made it seem attractive to funders and audiences were also disadvantaging the user. But for a long time that didn't really matter. The project still continued because people couldn't really see what the real experience of people in the developing world was. I think it really highlights the power imbalance between developing world users and first world audiences, and the project shows the risks of setting up projects that are funded in this way.
Okay, so you know, obviously
this work
didn't work out for very clear, obvious reasons. And so we're looking at, you know, other problem solving methodologies too. I think, you know, other people have recognized this, the problems with design thinking as a process. And so there's all these other processes that you see on this slide that they either can influence problem solving methodologies or they are their own type of problem solving methodology. One that I'm beginning to fold into my own teaching as I get into teaching this across campus is equity times design, which folds racial justice into the design thinking process, which I think particularly where we are located geographically is critical, and just in terms of being in the US and the issues that are very present here. As we can see here, we're not going to delve into the history too much because that's part of our future project, is really digging into the history. However, when we did start to, as you can see, it's a lot of white people. And that feels highly problematic to both of us. So we really want to dig in and look at that. And then I'm going to just pass it over to Anupam now, who's going to talk about a project that he was doing that really was using all these aspects of design thinking before really knowing it was a thing, which is something that I experienced myself. And I think probably many of you might as well. There are elements of design thinking that we use without realizing that that's what it's connected to. So Anupam, I'll take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because when you talked about the history and the why bodies in the history of design thinking, I was thinking like how can it can come out of the framework of designer being at the center, and how can it be used for the communities to use it for solving their own problems. And this is one of the examples that I did. It was around 2014 and 15, where we were dealing with issues around food and health and genetically modified food. There are organizations in India who are fighting against GMO food. Mainly one very important figure in this field is Dr. Vandana Shiva. She's an ecofeminist and she's fighting against the seed rights of the indigenous people. So we were within our housing society and the members of that housing society, we were discussing about various aspects of genetically modified food and how much pesticides and fertilizers are going in our food and how that is impacting our health situation. And then collectively we thought of addressing it. So we have I run a nonprofit called Council for Arts and Social Practice, which has 4 chapters in 4 different cities. And within that, we have a segment called Citizen Design Lab, where we encourage people to come with a question or a query or just an idea, and we try to convert them into design. So this was one of the project which we dealt with, and we were looking at the concerns around genetically modified food and how to create safe food habits. And then we kind of met and we started basically what Eli talked about, and we were doing the same stuff, but in a different way. So first step was inspiration. We creatively tried to understand our needs, such as access to safe food within our economic means. That is very important because not everybody comes from the same economic background. We also looked at the best practices in new farming technologies, and that can be used in solving our problems. We looked at different techniques like aquaponics and hydroponics and warmoponics. And also we looked at the history of such practices. It's like when scientifically we present something, it feels like it's a new invention, but then it's very important to see how it is rooted in the history and practices earlier than that time. Then we also worked on generating ideas like what kind of things we can do to address these issues. In the past, the solution was visiting the nearest local organic farm and buy products from there. But keep in mind, not everybody has that means to kind of afford that much of money to do that, or going to the store and buying organic products. So these were the main areas that we were looking at. Then we started thinking, what would be the possible solution? We looked at the idea of community garden, kind of creating a community garden, but given Mumbai has a immense lack of space, crisis in like building anything, we kind of started thinking about something that can be very more practical. And then we went to Eli, maybe you want to move on to the next slide, 2 slides from that. Then we started kind of ideating, which is like thinking about what kind of design can you produce and where it can be implemented. So we looked at the terraces because that's where the space which is unused in these buildings, and because we don't have ground space. So we started looking at the terrace spaces, and we came out with the idea of building a terrace garden, that would allow that unused space to be functioning at the same time providing food for us. But we needed to like develop something that would require minimum maintenance, because everybody has offices and their own jobs and other kind of work, so they cannot invest a lot of time in, like they cannot actually do the farming. So we needed to do something which is very minimal in terms of maintenance, and also accessibility and production cost. So we started kind of prototyping. We created these fiberglass tubs for like the grow bed. So this, if you go to the previous two slides where we have kind of designed a basic structure, and then we put some tubs in it, and then we put grow bed like matters, which is basically gravel. We don't use soil in this process, so we use gravel. And then there are two tanks. Aquaponics is basically a system where you use the water, the waste from the fishes to go and be the nutrient for the plants, and then the plants will clean the water and drop back the same clean water to for the fishes, and it's more oxygenated. So it's a very simple technique, and it can be done by anyone, anywhere, providing you know about the temperature and the how it is affecting the water. So you need to kind of do this thing where you put the fish tank underneath and then the grow bed on top, and the water will be circulating. So a very simple technique. So we created this. After the prototype, we came to make the decision like not everybody can invest in making grow bed and like with fiberglass and all. So we used plastic sheets to just put on the structure and then put the gravel, which will hold it. And then we kind of put, and we also used used recycled bathtub for the fish tank underneath. And here you can see, like, I don't know if you can see that second picture where the fish and the producers are shown, yeah, right here. So what happened actually, this site then started becoming an active space for community building, and also apart from food producing, this became a space for learning. My friend who collaborated with me, he's an engineer, chemical engineer, he kind of collaborated with me in this project, and it became a kind of a workshop space on teaching on alternative farming, mainly aquaponics. So it had a multiple usage of that space. And the defining question that we were looking at, what are we eating and how does that inform our food practices as well as our physical and mental health? How does the food production and distribution system get control over our food practices, habits, and culture over time? And then the next question is impact of GM production, pesticides, and fertilizer on our health and future. How does organic food practice foster socioeconomic class division? Not everybody can afford, because when it becomes tagged as organic, it becomes much expensive, and then not everybody can afford it. So it's kind of reinforcing economic class structure, and how art can address this issue. So how through the lens of art, we slowly started addressing this. This is where you can see my friend is giving a workshop on aquaponics farming, and I'm standing right at the back. Yeah, and then I was also looking at the history of potato peeler. It's a very interesting thing, because when we are talking about human-centered design, and we see the evolution of potato peeler, and there's another kind of potato peeler which you can see on the right side of the slide, which is basically made from the shell of a mussel. And it's a very simple technique. You just take it, you rub it on a stone, and then you go. It's totally affordable, accessible, and it's also includes the cultural landscape of a person, which includes the land and other accessibility. So yeah, that kind of made us, especially when I was thinking about it made us question, like, if people are already doing this kind of practices, how is then design thinking can be taken and used in different communities to solve their problem? Yeah, Eli, you want to take it from here, or you want? Yeah, I can also be when
Sure.
we're looking at. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is really locate the gaps in this design thinking process in all different ways. And there's other people doing this work. So it's not as though this is a new concept to sort of interrogate this process. And so we just wanted to really quickly, I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to go through this quick. There's three people that we thought were doing really great work. Dr. Leslie Ann Knoll she was at Tulane, and now I believe she's at NC State, Assistant Professor of Art and Design. And Leslie Ann practices design through emancipatory, critical, and anti-hegemonic lenses. focusing on equity, social justice, and the experiences of people who are often excluded from design research. Her research also highlights the work of designers outside of Europe and North America as an act of decolonizing design. She also attempts to promote greater critical awareness among designers and design students by introducing critical theory concepts and vocabulary into the design studio. The designer's critical alphabet is a great example, and I'm so excited to have found this because in my own work, across, there's courses in engineering, courses in the honors college, courses in student engagement, and career development, that I feel like this is really those folks to have access. She's doing amazing work. Natasha Jen is a designer, and she examines the lack of critique throughout design. She's really feels that within the design community, there's a lack of like a self-reflexive critique of this process. And then the other person is Heffa Greenaway, the first Indigenous architect to be registered in Victoria. Greenaway writes on why it's more critical than ever that we infuse Indigenous perspectives into our design thinking. And we just want to end on it by saying 67,000 plus years of wisdom carries a lot of knowledge. We still have a lot of work to do to uncover the origins of thought and practice that led to this creative problem-solving methodology, especially as we examine our own histories in often unknowingly engaging in the design thinking process. That is all we want to share with you today, but we are fully open and welcome questions. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That was amazing. Yeah, now is our time to open up the floor for questions. And if you'd like to not unmute and use your voice, you can also type your questions in the chat and I can read those off. I'm gonna open it up.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So Eli and Anupam, thank you for your wonderful presentation. I've been wondering while I was listening to you talking, if you have any ideas of how this human-centered design thinking could be utilized in like an art museum setting.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I left out my design thinking process history because of time, but the program that is running actually at the museum right now, Stay Gold, I did not intentionally use the design thinking process because at the time when we were developing it, I was unaware of the process. But when I look back at how we approached this, we were sort of kind of doing that in a way. We worked as a class, actually. Dr. DeCindio, who's here, challenged us to create a program connecting to Mapping Q. And so what we had to do was think about the LGBTQI+ community, think about the needs of all the different folks in that community, from youth to elders and everyone in between, and then figure out how to create a program that would serve that community. And then, piloting the program. So while we didn't make a prototype, we did test the program. And we did revise the program many times. So, and it's an ongoing process that, the program is never sort of repeats itself. Part of that has to do with, just the focus, but also, we've tried doing digital programming. We've tried hybrid programming. We've tried having it at different locations. So we've tried these different things. So that is one example, but I think the most important thing when I think about design thinking in terms of community is that it does have a lot of power to create programs and also offer skills to community to do this process on their own. So, using empathy as a tool to learn about who you're serving that seems kind of obvious, right? Like we of course we want to do that, but then using that intentionally, okay, defining the problem. So what is the challenge in serving those communities? What's the real problem, not the symptom of the problem? And then how can we, use our collective brains to come up with solutions? So I think that's a way to do it. I think it could have a lot of power in that process for museums.
I just want to add a little bit to this, is like when we're talking about, all this aspects of empathy and shedding of biases and looking at ideation as a way of free thinking. So often, even in the communities, we have a lot of biases and conflicts inherent within them. So if this tool will allow like to come together and forget about that, suspend those biases and things temporarily, and then kind of start generating the ideas and kind of, think in terms of design rather than thinking in terms of individual within the community setup. So I think that's even more powerful for me.
I have a question about failure, especially in incorporating design thinking into classes. I think, at least from my experience, it seems like when we have like experiential learning opportunities with, real projects and real communities, that that sometimes that the notion of failure or not turning out the way students expect can cause a lot of anxiety, especially in terms of like grading and just how it's perceived. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
I think that one of the things with design thinking that's important to emphasize when working with people is that you have to embrace uncertainty. It's part of the process, and we're never going to know if something's going to succeed. And so I think framing it around the fact that this is a process that's ongoing. It's probably not going to be resolved in a semester even. However, you can get closer to solutions, and you can often reveal problems that were not visible before, which I think is also another powerful aspect. So I think emphasizing that for students that, the end goal of design thinking is obviously to create a viable, feasible solution. However, there's a lot of other paths it might take. And so I think just emphasizing that at the outset so that students understand that, it doesn't always work out. And that's part of the process. And if we had endless amounts of time, we would continue until we came to a solution that worked. But failure is like, learn from it. What did you learn from your failure? And if you can illustrate that, then you get an A,
Yeah, also when we're talking about failure, that is also a beginning of a new inquiry, right? So it kind of leads you to the next ideation process. And that's where I think when I talked about the design thinking, it's never completed. There's a lot of revisiting involved in it. So I think when we are stopping and identifying failure, maybe that could be a beginning of new ideation or revisiting stuff. Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Any other questions? I know it's almost time here.
I have one.
Cool.
Cool. I think a lot about a couple of things, and I'll try to make my question make sense. But I think a lot about accessibility and having ideas and programs and outreach initiatives operate organically. But a concern of mine is that level, the empathy aspect of it, and being able to like create something and then let it go in a community and not have it like a good example is like a CSA, like a community source agriculture program, intended to like create community and to create good food for your community, but then having it overrun by people who like don't necessarily need that resource and who are more like, ooh, I'm getting my like super organic and I'm supporting my farmers and community, but then they're kind of taking up that resource that could be better utilized by people who actually like really need that and need that community, versus like someone whose budget can like totally be supported by maybe potentially buying, more expensive stuff that is sourced in a different way. Do you know what I mean? So I'm trying to wonder, like, how do you try to remain objective in that way, and how do you like teach that empathy so people remember that? I don't know. That makes sense.
I mean, it's a great question, and I think in the work that I'm new to, by the way, I just want to be transparent about that too. I'm also new to this work and new to teaching it, and so when I'm currently working with a partner, client, community organization. And it's sort of like the process, you have to sort of let it go like a child out into the world. And, you can't control all aspects. Like once it's released to whomever you're problem solving for, the way they implement it is kind of, you can't really control that outcome, unfortunately. It is one of the unfortunate aspects is like, once you release it, it's kind of up to the person to, or the group to sort of maintain. I agree with you though, that there could be a really cool and interesting way to include the partner in the design thinking process so that they are going through those steps as well. And that's not built into the process right now. It's not. And I think that's a really interesting and great observation that you made, because yeah, how can we keep it sustainable and authentic to what it initially was created for? So definitely something for me to think about and think around.
Yeah, for me, it is important that the tool goes out to the community, because that's the whole purpose of it, how the design thinking can be used by most of the people, or as much as people, or communities possible. Because if we just kind of bring it or bracket it within the designers or certain stakeholders, then again, it is not accessible. It is just, made for certain consumers. It's not a tool that we are kind of opening up for mass uses or, broader uses. Yeah.
Thank you guys. That was very insightful. And I know it's one that I struggle with a lot, where it's like, no, you kind of have to let go at some point, and you have to let it organically evolve, however, which way it's going to go, especially for that community. But yeah, I think a good point is having those perspectives in that design process is a great idea.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that too. That's a problem that I'm personally having with the program stay gold, is sort of letting go of that, and feeling like it will continue in the way it was intended to. And I struggle with that. So it's just an interesting challenge. And also building that empathy with community, and then you don't want to abandon them, right? You don't want to say, we just formed all these close relationships and you trusted me, and now I'm sort of releasing you into the world. So there's that fear too. So very many aspects to your question that are very relevant.
Oh, is it frozen? No.
Does anyone have any other questions? I have a barky neighbor right now.
Is that a question?
Yeah, he's like, I have a question. Well, if anybody doesn't have any questions, I just wanted to thank you both so much for taking the time and diving in and sharing with us all of your interest in research.
Thanks. Thanks for ABC for holding this, and thanks for creating space for us to present.
Yes, thank you for the hard work, and yeah. Wow.
Now we're just going to awkwardly stare at each other.
Is it only both of us, or people are there?
I think it's
No.
yeah, everyone's here still.
Okay, yeah.
I'm gonna go. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, Marissa. I guess I'll go too.
Bye. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Margo.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Bye, Anupam.
Yeah.
Oh, this is
Bye-bye.
great.
Thank you, Margo.
Bye. Yeah, of course.
Bye-bye.
I'm gonna move on to the next one. Oh, and I should stop the recording. Stop.